The moment the clock struck noon on January 1st, 2026, the illusion didn't just crack, it shattered, violently, publicly, and with a precision that felt almost personal. This wasn't just another celebrity rumor spiraling out of control. This was a narrative assassination unfolding in real time, aimed squarely at Meghan Markle and everything the world thought it knew about her rise. Because while the world was primed to celebrate a polished reinvention, Netflix deals, lifestyle empires, curated grace, something else hijacked the stage entirely. Something older, something buried, and someone, somewhere decided it was finally time to dig it up. Within hours, the internet wasn't talking about brand launches or empowerment arcs. It was consumed by a flood, a calculated, almost surgical release of images so sharp, so undeniable, they didn't just raise questions, they rewrote the conversation. These weren't the tired, grainy clips skeptics had been arguing over for years. No, these were crystal clear snapshots from a world most people never even get close to. Monaco decks, Saint-Tropez nights, private yachts gliding through waters reserved for billionaires and royalty. And at the center of it all, Meghan. Not as an outsider, not as someone lucky to be there, but as someone who looked like she belonged. And that's where the story turns dangerous. Because for nearly a decade, the official narrative painted a very different picture. A struggling actress, a woman grinding through auditions, a relatable journey. But these images? They don't whisper struggle, they scream access. They suggest a life running parallel to the one the public was sold. A life of introductions, invitations, and proximity to power that doesn't just happen by accident. And suddenly, the internet began asking the one question no PR machine can easily silence: how does someone allegedly climbing from the bottom appear so effortlessly at the very top, long before the world was even watching? The timing only makes it more explosive. Why now? Why release this kind of material at the exact moment Meghan Markle was attempting to cement her identity as a global figure of influence and reinvention? It doesn't feel random. It feels like a message, a warning maybe, or even a reminder that before the headlines, before Prince Harry, before the palace gates, there was a chapter that never made it into the official story. And now, that chapter is being forced open. As the images spread like wildfire, social media transformed into a forensic lab. Every frame dissected, every background face identified, every yacht traced. And what kept surfacing was a pattern, not coincidence, not luck, but repetition. The same elite environments, the same high-level gatherings, the same kind of company. This wasn't a one-off appearance. This was presence, consistent, comfortable, almost strategic. And then came the whispers that refused to stay whispers anymore. Voices from within elite circles, the kind that rarely speak, began to echo a narrative long buried under layers of discretion. They spoke of controlled entry, of how access to those worlds isn't bought with money alone, but granted through value, through vetting, through silent agreements that never make it into public biographies. And suddenly, the phrase that had lingered on the fringe for years exploded into the mainstream conversation with full force: yacht girl, loaded, controversial, impossible to ignore. But here's where it gets even more unsettling, because it's not just about where she was, it's about how she moved within those spaces. In every image, there's no hesitation, no awkwardness, no sign of someone out of place. Instead, there's confidence, awareness, a kind of ease that suggests familiarity, as if these weren't new environments to navigate, but ones already mastered. And that detail, that's what's pulling people deeper into this spiral, because it challenges the idea of randomness entirely. Now, the timeline itself is under a microscope. Between 2008 and 2012, years publicly framed as uncertain, unstable, transitional, these images suggest something else entirely was happening beneath the surface. International travel, elite gatherings, connections forming quietly, strategically, far from the scrutiny that would come later. And it raises a question that refuses to fade. Was this the real foundation of everything that followed? Because by the time she met Prince Harry in 2016, the narrative says it was chance, a blind date, a spark. But what if it wasn't chance at all? What if it was the final step in a much longer, much more calculated journey through circles designed to lead exactly there? And if that's true, then who was guiding it? Because behind every exclusive door is a gatekeeper, and behind every gatekeeper is a system. Names like Marcus Anderson begin surfacing more frequently now, not as casual friends, but as connectors. The kind who don't just open doors, but decide who gets to walk through them. The kind who operate quietly, invisibly, yet hold influence powerful enough to reshape destinies. So now the story isn't just about Meghan Markle. It's about the machinery behind the scenes. It's about who knew, who facilitated, who watched her rise, and who might now be pulling the strings behind this perfectly timed unraveling. Because leaks like this don't just happen. Not at this scale. Not with this level of clarity. Someone held onto these images for years, protected them, waited, and then at the exact moment her reinvention reached its peak, they let them go. The silence that followed from the Sussex camp? Deafening. No immediate denials. No aggressive legal push. Just stillness. And in a world where narratives are controlled down to the last detail, silence doesn't calm the storm. It feeds it. Because now the question isn't whether she was there. That part feels answered. The real question, the one echoing through every corner of the internet, is why this past was hidden so carefully, and who decided it was time for the world to finally see it. And this feels like only the beginning. And just when it seemed like the storm couldn't get any more intense, the narrative took an even darker turn. Because now the focus isn't just on what those images show, but on the invisible hands that made sure the world would see them exactly when it hurt the most. This wasn't chaos, this was choreography. Someone didn't just leak photos, they detonated a reputation. And they did it with timing so precise it feels almost surgical. Because while Meghan Markle was carefully constructing a future built on influence, relatability, and reinvention, someone else was dragging the past into the spotlight with ruthless intent, forcing the world to look backward instead of forward. And now, the question that refuses to go away is simple, but chilling. Who benefits from this? Because in the world of extreme wealth, elite circles, and global influence, nothing moves without a reason. These aren't random leaks from a forgotten hard drive. These are controlled releases, high definition, curated, undeniably real moments from places where cameras are not supposed to exist. Private yachts, closed door gatherings, environments where discretion isn't just expected, it's enforced. So how did these images survive? Who held on to them for over a decade? And more importantly, why now? One theory gaining serious traction points directly back to the very circles those images expose. The same Mediterranean elite, the same Gulf state power brokers, the same world where silence is currency and loyalty is everything, until it isn't. Because in that world, protection is conditional. It lasts as long as you remain valuable, aligned, useful. But the moment that balance shifts, the moment you step out of line, or worse, become a liability, the silence can break. And when it breaks, it doesn't whisper, it roars. There's growing speculation that something changed behind the scenes. That alliance is quietly fractured. That decisions made in recent years may have unsettled figures who prefer to remain in the shadows. And if that's true, then these leaks aren't revenge. They're a message, a reminder of origins, a signal that no matter how far someone rises, the past can always be pulled back into the present. But then there's another theory, one that feels even more personal, the burned associate. Because no one climbs through elite circles alone. There are facilitators, gatekeepers, pathfinders, the same ones who allegedly opened doors, arranged introductions, and smoothed the path long before the world was watching. And what happens to those people when they're no longer needed? When the story is rewritten and their role is erased? In high-stakes environments like this, resentment doesn't fade. It waits. It watches. And sometimes it strikes at the exact moment it will cause the most damage. Imagine someone sitting on these images for years, watching the rise, watching the reinvention, watching the narrative shift further and further away from the truth they remember. And then finally deciding to press send. Not for money, not for fame, but for impact, for correction, for exposure. Because if this were about profit, those images would have been sold quietly to the highest bidder years ago. But they weren't. They were released publicly, freely, strategically, which suggests something far more calculated. This was about control of the narrative. And then there's the role of the institution itself, the silent giant in the background, the British establishment. For years, there were whispers that certain stories were kept buried to protect the image of the monarchy, that certain details were never allowed to surface because the damage would have been too great. But by 2026, the dynamic has shifted. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are no longer operating within that system. The incentive to shield, to protect, to suppress It's gone. And when that protection disappears, what remains is exposure, not necessarily an active attack, but a withdrawal of defense. And sometimes that's all it takes. What makes this entire situation even more explosive is the reaction, or rather, the lack of one. Because in a media landscape where every rumor is met with immediate statements, legal threats, or carefully crafted responses, the silence from the Sussex camp is impossible to ignore. No detailed explanation, no direct denial, no aggressive pushback, just a vacuum. And in that vacuum, speculation multiplies. Questions grow louder. Narratives spiral further out of control. Because silence in moments like this doesn't calm anything. It amplifies everything. And now the conversation has shifted beyond the images themselves. It's no longer just about yachts, locations, or elite gatherings. It's about contradictions. About the gap between the story that was told and the story these images seem to suggest. About whether the rise from Hollywood actress to royal figure was truly organic or something far more engineered. And that's where things become deeply uncomfortable. Because if connections from those early years, from Monaco, from Saint-Tropez, from those private decks, can be linked to later opportunities, to introductions, to pivotal moments like that 2016 meeting, then the entire narrative changes. Not slightly, completely. It stops being a fairy tale and starts looking like a blueprint, a strategy, a long game executed with precision. And people are starting to notice the pattern, the repetition of certain names, the overlap of certain circles, the consistency of access in spaces where access is everything. It's no longer being dismissed as coincidence, it's being examined as design. And hovering over all of this is one terrifying possibility: this is only the first wave. Because if someone had access to this level of material, high definition, time-stamped, deeply embedded within elite environments, what else do they have? Travel records, guest lists, messages, documentation that could connect every dot the public is only beginning to see? The internet is already bracing for it, waiting, watching. Because once a leak like this begins, it rarely ends cleanly. It escalates, and the psychological toll of that looming uncertainty is impossible to ignore. Because now, every move, every appearance, every attempt at rebranding is happening under the shadow of what might surface next. The past isn't just resurfacing, it's threatening to keep unfolding, piece by piece, until there's nothing left hidden. And at the center of it all remains a single unresolved tension. Who was Meghan Markle before the world knew her name, and how much of that truth was deliberately kept out of sight? Because this isn't just about scandal anymore. It's about control, of image, of history, of perception. And right now, that control is slipping. The mask hasn't fully fallen, but it's cracked. Deeply, irreversibly. And through those cracks, the world is seeing fragments of a story that doesn't quite match the one it was told. A story filled with power, proximity, and questions that refuse to stay buried. And the most unsettling part? This doesn't feel like the end. It feels like a warning shot. Because somewhere, someone still has more. And when, not if, the next piece drops, it won't just add to the story. It might completely rewrite it.